What does it take to start a war? Weapons, commanders, tanks, missiles, and, most importantly, soldiers. But what happens if the soldiers stop fighting? The answer to this question is now being given by the Russian army. Thousands of Russian soldiers are surrendering to the Ukrainian army. And how does this happen? The experience of a Russian soldier who surrendered to the Ukrainian army was quite interesting. The Ukrainian army is very careful to keep the identity of the soldier secret. Therefore, in this article we will refer to the surrendered Russian soldier as Victor, and we will not share his real name with you. Victor was a 22-year-old Russian youth. He had finished high school in Russia and wanted to become a good lawyer. During his studies, he had been a member of many anti-Putin student clubs. Victor believed that in order to achieve peace in Russia, his country needed to democratize. He was working secretly for the end of Putin's rule as soon as possible. He was fed up with Putin's aggressive policies. He wanted to end Putin's rule so that Russia could become a peaceful state. Victor, a very successful young man, wanted to join politics in Russia and become an MP in the coming years. He especially wanted to do a lot of work on human rights. Putin's decision to invade Ukraine changed Victor's life completely. Victor had just graduated from university and wanted to work in an office as a lawyer, but because of the war, there was a big economic crisis in Russia. For a long time, Victor could not find work. Meanwhile, the war was intensifying every day. Victor participated in anti-war protests several times. He managed to escape from the Russian police. During this period, the Ukrainian army's successes in the war were constantly increasing. The Russian army was suffering a heavy defeat, and many Russian soldiers were dying. Victor began to think that this war was about to end. He felt that Putin could not continue this war any longer. But Putin made a very strange move at this time. Putin decided to mobilize 300,000 Russian soldiers to join the army. After this decision, millions of Russian citizens decided to leave their country. There were kilometers-long queues at the Russian borders, but Victor could not leave his country because his mother had cancer. Victor ran to the hospital every day and tried to cheer his mother up. He didn't want to leave his mother. Soon, Victor was asked to join the army. He did not want to go to war, but he was forced into the army by Russian soldiers. Victor was very angry because he was separated from his mother. He did not know what to do when he went to the battlefield. After a very short training at the Russian military base in Belgorod, he was sent to the war zone, sent to Mariupol. Victor didn't want to kill anyone. When he was sent to the front, he experienced great fear. His fear increased when he saw many soldiers dying at the front. He didn't shoot at any of the Ukrainian soldiers. He never left the trench until the fighting was over. That's when Victor heard a noise. Ukrainian soldiers were making an announcement through a megaphone. The Ukrainian soldier said the following: "You don't have to die for Putin. This is not your war. Surrender and make this war and let no one die. If you wanted to live, contact us." As Ukrainian soldiers made this announcement, a drone started flying over the Russian trenches. Cards carried by these drones were thrown at the Russian soldiers. This card changed Victor's life. This card contained information about the I Want to Live hotline set up by the Ukrainian government. This card, with the phone number, informed Russian soldiers to surrender. Victor decided to call the number on this card. Then he made the first phone call. The Ukrainian authorities found out which front he was on. Soon the Ukrainian authorities called Victor and gave him some tactics for his escape plan. Victor would surrender to the Ukrainian army during a firefight. Victor did not want to give any more information about the surrender plan because it was important to keep these methods secret. Also, for the surrender of other Russian soldiers, Victor managed to surrender to the Ukrainian army during a firefight. Ukrainian soldiers took Victor to a safe place in Kiev. In this warehouse, Victor was given new clothes and hot meals. He was then allowed to meet his family. Victor spoke on the phone with his mother, who has cancer. This call was very emotional for Victor. Victor told his mother that he would be back very soon, in a few days. Victor was taken to the captured Russian soldiers. There were thousands of Russian soldiers here, but no one knew which soldiers had surrendered. The surrendered Russian soldiers were mixed in with the captured soldiers so that they would be safe when they returned home. The Russian authorities could not understand which of these soldiers were prisoners. Therefore, all the soldiers were considered to be prisoners. According to Russian law, Captured soldiers are recognized as veterans when they return home. The Russian government pays salaries to veterans. So in this way, Russian soldiers who surrendered receive a salary when they return home. So how do these soldiers return home? In all wars, negotiations between the parties are ongoing. Russia and Ukraine often held talks in Istanbul, where an agreement is reached on a prisoner exchange. The same number of prisoners are returned. The Ukrainian army sends the surrendered Russian soldiers home in a prisoner exchange. Viktor is waiting for the next prisoner exchange to return home. But Viktor is not alone. Thousands of Russian soldiers are waiting to go home in this way. The Ukrainian government made a very important announcement today. Kirill Budanov, the head of intelligence at the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, said that there is a great interest in the I Want to Live project so far. A total of 9,836 Russian soldiers have contacted Ukrainian authorities through this project. In addition, the I Want to Live website has been visited by more than 40 million people. About 84% of these visits were from Russia. However, the exact number of soldiers surrendered through this project has not been shared. Information on this issue is kept confidential to ensure the safety of the surrendered Russian soldiers. The I Want to Live project has become a nightmare for the Kremlin administration. Russia has repeatedly launched hacker attacks to take down the site and the phone line, but without success. This project of the Ukrainian authorities is changing the course of the war. Russian soldiers surrender one after another. The surrender of Russian soldiers is disrupting all the Kremlin's war plans. The Ukrainian armed forces seized an incredible opportunity for the first time since the beginning of the war with internal unrest in Russia and Wagner's refusal to fight, and Moscow's problems with military refueling troops on the Ukrainian front lines. Ukrainians continue to crush the Donetsk region. At the moment, Bakhmut is at risk from the front lines that the Russians most care about. The Ukrainians hold the last line of defense at Kaliska. After dismantling the soldiers of the Russian Air Deployment Force, the attack operations continued simultaneously. Violent clashes are still ongoing in Baku, Ivka, Kurdyumov, and Pereskovia. But the focus of the Ukrainians at this time was to completely seize the settlement of Kazivka and surround Bakhmut from the southwest. Therefore, in line with Kiev's major retaliatory plans, the Ukrainian armed forces began artillery attacks to completely seize Khrushchevka. At the moment, 11 after the soldiers of the Russian air downloads were completely evacuated from the city. There are only 72 of the Russians here. There was a motorcycle. The Russian army, which held the last line of defense, could not withstand the HIMARS artillery attacks by the Ukrainians, both due to the lack of communication and lack of military resources in the city. After the artillery attacks, the Russians were evacuated from the northern neighborhoods of the city. Denis Yaroslavsky that the Ukrainian forces controlled Khrushchevka and also Bakhmut from the air as a result of the attack operations in Kleshchev, which was also supported by the Ukrainian Air Force. The Ukrainians managed to wave blue-yellow flags in this city. The Ukrainian armed forces actually took control of Khrushchevka. Ukrainian defenders have ensured full air control over the city. The 57th of the Ukrainian armed forces carried out attacks on Khrushchevka on behalf of Kiev. The storm continued to push the Russians north of the city. You know, the town of Bakhmut is located in the north of Khrushchevka. Thus, while the Russians fled north of Khrushchevka, they were actually under crossfire at the southern front lines of Bakhmut. The Ukrainian forces were prepared to attack, targeting Russian troops fleeing Khrushchevka in this critical area. The clashes continued for a long time. The Air Force of the Ukrainian Army at Bakhmut provided air support to clashes in the strategic area between Khrushchevka and Bakhmut. As the Russian troops in this clash area failed desperately to leave Khrushchevka, they were also subjected to artillery attacks from the south of Bakhmut and successful shootings by the Ukrainian Air Force. In addition to capturing Khrushchevka, the Ukrainians crowned its victory by destroying a large Russian army. Currently, there are 72 Russian attack units, including the motorized brigade. Kleshchevo has almost no troops left. It was under the control of the Ukrainians. But Kiev's rebel plans are, of course, not limited to Khrushchevka. The city of Bakhmut, which is of serious importance to both sides of the war, is also one of the front lines that Kiev seeks to liberate, especially after taking Kaliska back. The Ukrainians formed an open offensive corridor south of Bakhmut because the northern direction of Bakhmut was under Ukrainian rule. The Russians were stuck in the corner. Beryshivka is located in the north of Bakhmut. The Ukrainian army continues to direct its troops here to attack Bakhmut. Bakhmut has now been completely captured from both the south and the north. The Ukrainians are attacking this city from both sides, pressing the Russians towards the central front lines of Bakhmut. So what are the chances of Bakhmut now after the Russians lost Khrushchevka? I would like to remind you before continuing with our video, if you oppose the invasion of Ukraine and want to support the work we do with my team, you can like our video by commenting and pressing the super thanks button below. Due to recent problems between Russian leader Vladimir Putin and Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin, Wagner mercenaries refused to fight in Bakhmut. So the Russians are currently inadequate to the Ukrainians in terms of military support for Bakhmut. Kiev is aware that the Russian military is inadequate in the city of Bakhmut. Therefore, after the capture of Shuka, the Ukrainian assault officers headed directly to the war castle. Ukraine wants to overthrow the last coup by seizing Bakhmut. Vladimir Putin is desperate. If Russia completely loses control of Bakhmut, the course of the war will change a lot. The Ukrainian forces are continuing to surround Bakhmut with gratitude for this. The Ukrainian Air Force continuously carries out countless types of operations in the city's airspace in the city of Bakhmut, which is of great importance to Russian leader Vladimir Putin. The troops of Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov are being used instead of Wagner forces. But the Chechen troops that Moscow plans to use in Bakhmut seem insufficient against the Ukrainian forces. Ukrainians are far more populated than Russians in Bakhmut. The total number of Chechen fighters is estimated to be less than 30,000. The principal camp of the Chechen troops is Mariupol and its surroundings. But Russia's continuous evacuation of Chechen troops from Mariupol to Bakhmut is also quite risky. The reason is that on the critical route between Mariupol and Bakhmut, dozens of Ukrainian troops are waiting, ready to attack. Kiev knows that Moscow uses this connection route as a military delivery line. In fact, Russia, along with its Chechen troops, must redirect its mercenary troops from the Wagner group, which refused to fight after the uprising, back to Bakhmut. But after their withdrawal from Bakhmut, Wagner's forces were either relocated to Krasnodar in Russia or camped behind the front lines in the eastern regions of Ukraine, in Donetsk and Luhansk. Wagner forces, located in areas on the Luhansk-Russian border, are already among the groups responsible for the uprising against Putin. At the moment, it seems unlikely that Russia will use Wagner forces again on the Ukrainian front lines. The uprising in Russia has ended, but its effects continue. The leader of Vladimir Putin declared Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin a traitor and described the uprising initiated by Wagner forces as a knife thrown into Russia's back. Nevertheless, as a result of the uprising, Prigozhin announced an agreement which was mediated by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko and granted him immunity in Belarus. Wagner argued that his decision to accept this was due to his desire to avoid further clashes and civil war. If we consider that the Wagner Group has 25,000 troops, we can actually say that Russia has recovered from a very critical situation. This number could mean 10,000 soldiers. The rest is logistic. With these troops, Wagner forces could occupy much of Moscow. Although the uprising ended and Prigozhin was deported to Belarus, it's believed that Wagner's construction continues. The independent Russian news service Verka reported that a 24,000 square kilometer training base for Wagner was under construction in Osipovichi, Belarus, 200 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Kramarek said it was unlikely that Putin would let Prigozhin live. But in a second speech to the Russian people, Putin left the door open for Wagner mercenaries to join the armed forces. This approach is a sign of how much the Russian leader needs trained and experienced staff. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials have met the cross-border, short-lived uprising with caution and hope as Kiev forces continue to examine Russian defense for weaknesses and reclaim occupied territories. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Anatol Iyer said Ukraine's counterattack saved 130 kilometers squared by June 26 and gained 17 mi compared to a week ago. Malier also noted that Ukraine has also launched new attacks in Orkov, Vasilivka, Bohdunivka, Yagodny, Kazivka and Kuranivka in the north and south of Bakhmut, reinforcing a siege that began in mid-May. The official also added that Ukrainian troops are advancing 1 to 2 kilometers along these new axes. In summary, this difficult situation in Russia has paved the ground for the successful progress of the large-scale missile operations planned by the Ukrainian armed forces. In addition, the Russians lost their territories under occupation as well as their prestige. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, are expected to continue their offensive operations in this way after catching the pace. Kiev's next goal, after fully liberating the city of Bakhmut, is expected to turn its focus back to the southern front lines and eventually reclaim Crimea. In March 2022, the Russian General Staff stated that the existence of the Ukrainian naval forces had come to an end. Against these words of the Russian General Staff, a slap-up response came from the Ukrainian Navy. The response of the Ukrainian Navy was quite heavy and deeply shook the Russian Navy. On April 13, 2022, Ukrainian Neptune missiles struck the Russian Black Sea flagship Moskva, which sank on April 14. This constituted the first major victory for Kiev. As a result of this attack, the Russian Ministry of Defense openly acknowledged the deaths of only 5 crew members. But according to Alexei Danilov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, there were 510 personnel in Moskva at the time of the attack, of whom 58 are believed to have survived. Ukrainian forces challenged Russia's naval command with this attack. Kiev has shown the ability to prevent Russia's easy use of the Black Sea. Russian military ships sailed away from the Ukrainian coast to protect themselves. This gave Ukraine more room to maneuver near the coast. The shooting of Moskva has, above all, an important symbolic effect. Navy ships are synonymous with prestige. In addition, this event also affected the strategic importance of Snake Island. As a matter of fact, this importance has increased due to the fact that it can create a base for air defense systems and electronic warfare. So Ukraine tried several times to regain control of the island. The island now belongs to Ukraine again, and its strategic location no longer benefits Russia. The success of the Ukrainian armed forces at sea is not limited to sinking the Moskva. The Ukrainian army destroyed at least 5 Russian light vehicles carrying reconnaissance and sabotage teams. Within 24 hours, motorboats were sunk in island chains in the delta where the Dnipro River empties into the Black Sea. In the same area, a Russian warship was sunk by Ukrainian artillery. It wasn't clear what class the ship was in when it sank. An infrared photo accompanying the announcement showed a burning patrol boat with the operations carried out by the Kiev troops. The Russian Navy was quite worn out. Now, in the second year of the Ukrainian war, the Russian Navy is preparing to play a smaller role. On the other hand, Chinese naval strategists are examining the Ukrainian U.S. attack on Russia's Black Sea Fleet base. The attack on Sevastopol 6 months ago may not have had the desired effect, but this attack could have repercussions on maritime competition in the Western Pacific. In late October 2022, the Ukrainian Navy boldly attacked Russia's Black Sea Fleet headquarters in Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula. While the attack did not produce the expected result, such as sinking a large number of Russian warships, it captured the attention of naval strategists around the world as it used a major technological innovation. The attack was led by unmanned surface ships, which represented their first employment in naval warfare. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, worldwide maritime developments are followed with great interest, for the naval arms race currently underway in the Western Pacific could not be more fierce. The war in Ukraine is widely covered in the Chinese media. Chinese military analysts continue to draw profound lessons for understanding the form of modern warfare. Analysts have paid particular attention to the U.S. use of new weapons and strategies. The Chinese assessment noted that the Ukrainian Navy attack drones have a high degree of secrecy, in part due to the smooth shape of the ship. The evaluation emphasized the semi-submersible feature of Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles, where most of the hull firm is submerged. Likewise, a review noted that given their small size and shape, it can be difficult to capture such drones with conventional sonars. Moreover, the analysis observes that an attack on a port might be ideal in this respect, because moored ships rarely use active sonar when at anchor, let alone towed sonar arrays. The third advantage of using such ships for naval attack is that they seem somewhat difficult to destroy. Chinese analysts claim that typical ship anti-aircraft guns are not very effective against sea surface targets. This can be especially true when attacking ships are both small and fast. It was also reported that the Russian Navy had some difficulty in sinking the attacking ships. The assessment concludes that such USVS may pose a growing threat to medium-sized surface ships. The Chinese analyst does not exaggerate the threat from these stealth unmanned submersibles. Indeed, it makes clear that these weapons are most likely incomparable to standard torpedoes or anti-ship missiles. The analysis concludes with an interesting but inconclusive discussion about whether Ukrainian drone submersibles depend on the US Starlink system for communication and guidance. In particular, the Chinese assessment of the Sevastopol attack did not have any effect. The Russian fleet was criticized for its bow intelligence preparation and allowing Ukrainian attackers to get as close as possible. The author even gave the Ukrainians a kind of political victory from the war as they once again surprised and humiliated the Black Sea Fleet. As a result, one of the strategic aspects of the Ukrainian war is maritime, and Russia's interest in controlling the sea is not new but is linked to the Black Sea. Naval power is to be understood more broadly than naval power. Sea power is a collective effort that brings together like-minded nations and non-state actors united around their common values and interests in a stable and free shipping order. Their well-being and stability depend on the freedom of the sea, and it is in their interest to oppose players who do not play by the rules. Naval power can be used to oppose Russia en masse, including the private sector. States' margin of maneuver is limited by the need to prevent escalation. However, private maritime actors have leverage through their economic and financial strength. Almost all major shipping companies suspended operations to and from Russian ports, affecting the Russian economy. This illustrates the holistic nature of maritime power that transcends state actors and corporate processes to involve the corporate sector that shares the interests and concerns of maritime nations. States can also indirectly use broader non-naval maritime powers to exert influence on violators. For example, Russian-flagged, owned and operated ships are prohibited from calling at their ports by the US, UK, European countries, and other countries. All of these measures are part of a global comprehensive diplomatic effort by public and private stakeholders to put pressure on President Putin's regime. Ukraine's success at sea is reinforced with the support of Western states. Russian troops cornered on land and cannot achieve success at sea either. Ukraine's success in the seas attracts the attention of countries at the ends of the planet.